Okay, in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to answer a question that is very similar to the one you'll have just completed on the global hydrological cycle, where you were asked to draw and annotate a diagram that shows how water moves in that system. Okay, and that's what we are going to be doing here in this lesson. And if I just scroll down to the actual question itself, that's the task you're being asked to do, which is describe and explain how the global hydrological cycle works within a drainage basin. Your answer should refer to inputs, transfers, stores, and outputs. Okay. Now let's just remember that a drainage basin, if we just go back to something we did earlier, because you will have remembered this task from either today or somewhere time early in the week when you did it. The drainage basin is the area of land that is drained by the river. So the river lies at the center of that drainage basin, but the land itself, water can fall anywhere on this land and it will drain towards this river. But it won't necessarily drain there easily. There are all kinds of things that can interrupt its movement to a river, whether that's vegetation, lochs, mountainsides. It might be flowing through soil and it takes longer to get to the river. It might be percolating into rock. So what you've got to do in this question is think about what's water actually doing? Because what it's doing is it's entering the system, and we can see that here through this diagram, through rain. So that's its arrival, that's its input. It comes in as rain. Now, a number of things can happen. It can be intercepted by vegetation. Okay, and this is where the leaves of plants, stop the rain getting to the ground, and very often the roots of those plants will then absorb that rain. Now, what can happen at that stage is if the plant then warms up, evapotranspiration or transpiration can happen, which is where the moisture in the plant is evaporated back into the atmosphere. If it doesn't get intercepted by a plant, then it might get stored on the surface. Now, that could happen as ice, if the temperatures are colder, as snow, and it could be stored there for just one winter or for a number of years. It could also fall into a loch and be stored in the loch for a long period of time. Now, at this point, it might flow into a river and down to the main channel and into the sea. Or it might actually absorb into soil. Okay, so if it's not stored on the surface, it might actually infiltrate into the soil. Okay, and that infiltration is the key word there. And then the soil will either store it or it will start to trickle through the soil towards a river. And we call that through flow. We can see that word here. If it's not stored in the soil or traveling as a through flow through the soil to the main river, well, then it might actually soak into the rock, and we call this deep percolation. It's where water percolates into the rock. It soaks into the rock. That only happens when the rock is porous, and what that means is where it has holes in it. If it soaks into the rock, it will then either be stored as a groundwater in a thing called an aquifer, or it will transfer gradually through the rock, and now this can take thousands of years, to the main channel and then flow down to the sea. So what you can see is all along this, the water is moving in a number of directions. It's either going to at some point get maybe heated up and evapotranspirated back up into the atmosphere, or it's going to end up in a river, which is down here, flowing to the sea. Now, each of those descriptions I gave you is shown here. So you can see there's the inputs. Here are all the things that could store the water, possibly. Here are all of the ways water moves, whether it's on the surface up here, whether it's in soil as infiltration, whether it's in rock as percolation, whether it's moving as a through flow through the soil or as a ground flow through the rock. And here is its outputs. Now there's two outputs. Water either flows into the sea or it never gets to the sea because it's evapotranspiration, or you can just choose to write the word transpiration. It means the same thing. Now, what you need to do is either listen back to my verbal descriptions and type them up, or pick out the key bits of information that tell the story of water moving through a drainage basin from the moment it hits as an input, that's rainfall, or precipitation is the technical name, to the moment it exits the system, which is either transpiration or just flowing into the sea. And obviously the two main areas you're going to talk about is the storage areas and the transfer and flow areas. One thing we do not, and I repeat, we do not want to see in this answer is just copying these statements into your answer. I want this written as a continual flowing piece of work that shows that you clearly understand, can describe and explain how water moves through a drainage basin from the moment it hits the surface to the point it leaves that system when it flows into the sea.